Today, we will be starting The Hounds of Baskerville by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This will be Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who is usually very late in the mornings, save upon those not infrequent occasions when he was up all night, was seated at the breakfast table. I stood upon the hearthrug and picked up the stick which our visitor had left behind him the night before. It was a fine, thick piece of wood, bulbous-headed, of the sort which is known as a pen-lang lawyer. Just under the head was a broad silver band nearly an inch across. To James Mortimer, M.R.C.S., from his friends of the C.C.H., was engraved upon it with the date 1884. It was just such a stick as an old-fashioned family practitioner used to carry, dignified, solid, and reassuring. "Well, Watson, what do you make of it?" Holmes was sitting with his back to me, and I had given him no sign of my occupation. "How did you know what I was doing? I believe you have eyes in the back of your head." "I have, at least, a well-polished, silver-plated coffee pot in front of me," he said. "But tell me, Watson, what do you make of our visitor's stick? Since we have been so unfortunate as to miss him and have no notion of his errand, this accidental souvenir becomes of importance. Let me hear you reconstruct the man by the examination of it." "I think," said I, following as far as I could the methods of my own companion, "that Dr. Mortimer is a successful, elderly, medical man, well esteemed since those who know him give him a mark of their appreciation." "Good," said Holmes. "Excellent." "I think also that the probability is in favor of him being a country practitioner who does a great deal of his visiting on foot." "Why so?" "Because this stick, though originally very handsome, has been so knocked about that I can hardly imagine a town practitioner carrying it. The thick iron ferrule is worn down, so it is evident that it has done a great amount of walking with it." "Perfectly sound," said Holmes. "And then again, there are the friends of the C.C.H. I should guess that to be the something hunt, the local hunt whose members he has possibly given some surgical assistance to, and which made him a small presentation in return." "Really, Watson, you excel yourself," said Holmes, pushing back his chair and lighting a cigarette. "I am bound to say that in all the accounts which you have been so good as to give of my very small achievements, you have habitually understated your own abilities. It may be that you are not luminous yourself, but that you are a conductor of light. Some people, without possessing genius, have a remarkable power of stimulating it. I confess, my dear fellow, that I am very much in your debt." He had never said such before, and I must admit that his words gave me keen pleasure, for I had often been piqued by his indifference to my admiration and to the attempts in which I made to give publicity to his methods. I was proud, too, to think that I had so far mastered his systems as to apply it in a way which had earned his approval. He now took the stick from my hands and examined it for a few minutes with his naked eyes. Then, with an expression of interest, he laid down his cigarette, and carrying the cane to the window, he looked it over again with a convex lens. "Interesting, though elementary," said he, as he returned to his favorite corner of the settee. "There are certainly one or two indications upon the stick. It gives us basis for several deductions." "Has anything escaped me?" I asked with some self-importance. "I trust that there is nothing of consequence which I have overlooked." "I am afraid, my dear Watson, that your conclusions were erroneous. When I said that you stimulated me, I meant, to be frank, that in noticing your fallacies, I am occasionally guided towards the truth. Not that you are entirely wrong in this instance. The man is certainly a country practitioner, and he walks a great deal." "Then I was right. To that extent." "But that was all." No, my dear Watson, not at all, by no means at all. I would suggest, for example, that a presentation to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than from a hunt, and that the initials CC are placed before the hospital. The words Charing Cross naturally suggest themselves." "You may be right. The probability lies in that direction, and if we take this as a working hypothesis, we have a fresh basis from which to start a conclusion of this unknown visitor." Well, then supposing that CCH does stand for Charing Cross Hospital, what further inferences may we draw? Do none suggest themselves? You know my methods. Apply them. I can only think of the obvious conclusion that the man has practiced in town before going to the country. I think that we might venture a little further than this. Look at it in this light. On what occasion would it be most probable that such a presentation would be made? When would his friends unite to give him a pledge of their goodwill? Obviously, at the moment Dr. Mortimer withdrew from the service of the hospital in order to start in practice for himself. We know that there has to have been a presentation. We believe there may have been a change from a town hospital to a country practice. Is it then stretching our inference to say that the presentation was made on occasion of the change? It certainly seems probable. Now, you will observe that he could not have been on staff at the hospital, since only a well-established man in a London practice could hold such a position, and such as one would not drift into the country. What was he then? If he was in the hospital and yet not on the staff, he could have only been a house surgeon or a house physician, little more than a senior student. And he left 5 years ago, the date on the stick. So, your grave, middle-aged family practitioner vanishes into thin air, my dear Watson, and there emerges a young fellow under 30, amiable, ambitious, absent-minded, and the possessor of a favorite dog, which I should describe roughly as being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff. I laughed incredulously as Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his settee and blew little wavering rings of smoke up to the ceiling. As to the latter part, I have no means of checking you, said I, but at least it is not difficult to find out a few particulars from the man's age and professional career. From my small medical shelf, I took down the medical directory and turned up the name. There were several Mortimers, but only one who could be our visitor. I read the record aloud. Mortimer James, MRCS, 1882, Grimpen, Dartmoor, Devon. House surgeon from 1882 to 1884 at Charing Cross Hospital. Winner of the Jackson Prize for Comparative Pathology with an essay entitled Is Disease a Reversion? Corresponding member of the Swedish Pathological Society, author of Some Freaks of Atavism in Lancet 1882, Do We Progress in the Journal of Psychology, March 1883, medical officer for the parishes of Grimpen, Thornsley, and Highbarrow. No mention of that local hunt, Watson, said Holmes with a mischievous smile, but a country doctor, as you astutely observed. I think that I am fairly justified in my inferences. As to the adjectives, I said, if I remember all right, amiable, ambitious, and absent-minded. It is my experience that only an amiable man is one who receives testimonials. Only an unambitious one who abandons a London career for the country, and only an absent-minded one who leaves his stick and not his visiting card after waiting an hour in your room. And the dog? Has been in the habit of carrying the stick behind his master. Being a heavy stick, the dog has held it tightly by the middle, and the marks of his teeth are very plainly visible. The dog's jaw, as shown in the space between those marks, is too broad in my opinion for a terrier, and not broad enough for a mastiff. It may have been... Yes, by Jove, it is a curly-haired spaniel. He had risen and paced the room as he spoke. Now he halted in the recess of the window. There was such a ring of conviction in his voice that I glanced up in surprise. My dear fellow, how can you be so possibly sure of that? Well, for simple reason that I see the dog myself on our very doorstep, and there is the ring of its owner. Don't move, I beg you, Watson. He is a professional brother of yours, and your presence may be of some assistance to me. Now, in the dramatic moment of fate, Watson, when you hear the step upon the stair, which is walking into your life, and know whether not for good or ill, what does Dr. James Mortimer, a man of science, ask of Sherlock Holmes, the specialist in crimes? Come in! The appearance of our visitor was a surprise to me, since I had expected a typical country practitioner. He was a very tall, thin man, with a long nose like a beak, which jutted out between two keen grey eyes, set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He was clad in a professional but rather slovenly fashion, for his frock coat was dingy and his trousers frayed. Though young, his long back was already bowed, and he walked with a forward thrust of his head and a general air of peering benevolence. As he entered, his eyes fell upon the stick in Holmes's hand, and he ran towards it with an exclamation of joy. "I'm so very glad," said he. "I was not sure whether I had left it here or in the shipping office. I would not lose that stick for the world." "A presentation, I see," said Holmes. "Yes, sir. From Charing Cross Hospital. From one or two friends there on the occasion of my marriage." "Dear, dear, that's bad," said Holmes, shaking his head. Dr. Mortimer blinked through his glasses in mild astonishment. "Why is it bad?" "Only that you have disarranged our little deductions. Your marriage, you say?" "Yes, sir. I married, and so left the hospital, and with it all hopes of a consulting practice. It was necessary to make a home of my own." Come, we're not so wrong after all," said Holmes. "And now, Dr. James Mortimer. Mr., sir, Mr. A humble MRCS. And a man of precise mind, evidently. A dabbler in science, Mr. Holmes, a picker of shells on the shore of the great unknown ocean. I presume that it is Sherlock Holmes whom I'm addressing, and not— No, this is my friend, Dr. Watson. Glad to meet you, sir. I have heard your name mentioned in connection with that of your friend. You interest me very much, Mr. Holmes. I had hardly expected so disophylactic a skull or so well-marked suborbital development. Would you have any objection to my running a finger along your perineal fissure? A cast of your skull, until the original is available, would be an ornament for any anthropological museum. It is not my intention to be so fulsome, but I confess I covet your skull." Sherlock Holmes waved our strange visitor into a chair. "You are an enthusiast in your line of thought, I perceive, sir, as I am in mine," said he. "I observe from your forefigure that you make your own cigarettes. Have no hesitation in lighting one." The man drew out paper and tobacco and twirled up one in the other with surprising dexterity. He had long, quivering fingers as agile and restless as the antennae of an insect. Holmes was silent, but his little darting glances showed me the interest in which he took our curious companion. "I presume, sir," said he at last, "that it was not merely for the purpose of examining my skull that you have done me the honor to call here last night and again today." "No, sir, no, though I am happy to have the opportunity of doing that as well. I came to you, Mr. Holmes, because I recognized that I am myself an unpractical man, and because I am so suddenly confronted with the most serious and extraordinary problem. Recognizing, as I do, that you are the second highest expert in Europe." "Indeed, sir. May I inquire as to who has the honor of being the first?" asked Holmes with some asperity. "To the man of a precisely scientific mind, the work of Monsieur Berton has always been strongly appealing." "Then had you not better consult him?" "I said, sir, to the precisely scientific mind. But, as a practical man of affairs, it is acknowledged that you stand alone." "I trust, sir, that I have not inadvertently, just a little," said Holmes. "I think, Dr. Mortimer, you would do wisely if, without more ado, you would kindly tell me plainly what the exact nature of the problem is in which you demand my assistance." And that is part 1 of The Hounds of Baskerville. We hope to see you sometime soon for part 2.